Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, perfect. This is another episode of the Comic Cinematic Universe with Chill and Grace. This is, how do you call it? It's Coffee
and Comics.
Coffee and Comics edition. We're outside of Starbucks today. And today we're actually going to revisit Loki because it just ended. And I actually wanted to get a little bit of some Kang talk because so far I feel like now we've gotten different kind of variants, different instances of Jonathan Majors / Kang the Conqueror / what was Victor Timely? That was the other.
/ He Who Remains.
/ He Who Remains. So we've gotten quite a bit of what's to come in I guess the next Avengers of it's Kang Dynasty.
Yeah.
Right. So far, do you want to start with Loki?
Let's start with Loki. And I think it'd be like a nice segue to then get into more Kang talk.
Sure.
Especially because there's so much in the air when it comes to Kang now because of the whole legal elements.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's going to end up becoming very theory, and that's I think we'll do that as the second.
Out yet. Let's not just throw him under the bus. You know what I'm saying? For me, I like legal issues aside. I like the actor, you know, and I hope he has like longevity in his career. But if what they say is true and he goes down, then it's gonna suck for me. But who knows?
See, I've always thought, and this is such a selfish way of thinking, but I'm always like, actors need to think of us first, man, the fans.
Right.
Before they take on new projects, before they commit crimes, they need to understand that we need them for story.
Right.
But yeah, I think let's start with Loki, and then we can kind of segue into some like Kang Dynasty, Avengers, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Do you want to kick it off? In terms of let's give before we dive into, I guess, the series, just give a review. Like, what do you think of this season in comparison to the first season? Likes, dislikes, all that.
So I think I really enjoyed this season. I want to say it's hard to say as much as the original, just because I think the first season of Loki took our breath away in a way that we didn't expect. I think we all expected to love Loki, the series, because we all love Loki, the character. But I think that Marvel did such a great job giving the stage to a character that has always been secondary kind of in other films, or even himself feeling secondary to everything in his life, right? Which is, I think, a big thing with Loki. But I love how introspective the first season was. This season, I think, looked at it until the very last episode, and maybe the very second to last episode, and more of like a grand view, because you're dealing with kind of the aftermath of Sylvie killing off the He Who Remains,
right,
and then setting off the catalyst of events that we see happening in the season 2. The big one being that the quantum, the quantum loom, just the loom, right?
Yeah, the loom.
The loom.
Yeah.
The loom, its bands aren't basically able to withstand now all these different multiversal timelines going through, which it used to then kind of make as one piece, right? And so their immediate solution is that they need to try to expand the bands, and they find Victor Timely and all these things. So I love the whole the very big picture view, because I think it was really interesting, learning a little bit more about just the, I think, bureaucracy of the TVA, because I feel like I wasn't very aware of the other generals and the other judges and the other
clear, in the first season.
I feel like I wasn't so aware of it. I was like, oh, now that Renslayer's gone, in my head for some reason Mobius is now the number one or something, and I realized that there's so much more governing the TVA under He Who Remains,
right,
alongside Renslayer. And so I think it was really fun because we got to really dissect the TVA in that element, in that regard. And then just seeing them having to go back and forth and us trying to piece it together. What did He Who Remains, give Renslayer, where did they end up going? All the questions we were left with, obviously, at the end of season 1, which I think we were big and we were really excited to kind of dive into here in season 2. But what I love is that by the final episode, they really made this go back into very introspective into Loki as the character, which I think they didn't do for a big part of the series.
Yeah.
But I think it actually had a really big effect. Because I think one of the critiques I heard from somebody was that, like, oh, it doesn't feel like a Loki show anymore. It just seems like the TVA show or something. And I wouldn't disagree. I feel like the first few episodes were very TVA focused. Like, there wasn't, like, it wasn't singularly on, like, Loki. However, I feel like the way the last 2 episodes ended going about, I think it really did wrap around into Loki's story in a way that I really appreciate. So overall, like, I'm a very big fan of the season, big fan of the series. I think season 1 was my favorite. However, the finale of season 2 was my favorite above all.
Sure.
And to keep it short, that's my little take.
Okay. So I would say, kind of based off of what Tom Hiddleston said off of, I think it was Jimmy Fallon, his interview, like, post the season ending. Like, he kind of said season 2 is kind of almost like the second half of a book. And I think I kind of like that analogy of season 1 being the first half, and then season 2 just kind of finishes the story of Loki. Not to say that Loki is done and so like over with in the story of Marvel and the MCU, but say just come to think about it, like, Loki as a character, he's been with us since the very beginning. You know what I'm saying? He's had a longer run than Steve Rogers and Iron Man. I feel like he's had maybe the longest run minus Thor, because outside of Loki, I think Thor has been in the MCU, will be in the MCU the longest so far, you know? And I think, side note, I think I read something somewhere else to where Chris Hemsworth, he's about to break a record in terms of most solo movies for a superhero. He's about to pass Christopher Reeves for Superman playing Thor. So Thor 5, that's the most like solo superhero movies go. So Chris Hemsworth, so far he's been the longest, and him and Loki have been in there since Thor, the first Thor movie, you know, and I think that was maybe 2009. But back to this series, season 2, in comparison to season 1, I would actually put it almost on an equal level, because season 1 was so good just because it was unexpected. We didn't really know what to expect. It came out of left field in terms of what do we get post Infinity War, you know? And then like all the bombs they dropped in the first season of like the Infinity Stones not really being worth anything at all. And then the multiverse towards the end of season 1 just kind of happening. It's like, okay, now we're getting an introduction of the multiverse, and then all the following projects pretty much come as a result to season 1 of Loki, right? And now come season 2, I was curious just to see where they were going to take it after Loki is pushed back through the door, and then he comes back to the TVA, and we see the statue of Kang or Kang variant versus initially in season 1, I think we got a huge statue of like the timekeepers, right? And from there, I like how they kind of made it on some. Initially, the TVA is like there's no necessarily time traveling in the TVA, but Sylvie somehow pushed Loki to the past, and we come to later find out it's by design by He Who Remains. But in doing that, we introduce time slipping and all of that. And from episode 1 of season 2 to all the way to the end, where he learns to control the time slipping, I loved it just because so far I feel like in terms of time travel in the MCU, the only real clear-cut definition or clear-cut thing that made sense of time travel for us was Tony Stark in Endgame, because when it came down to Miss Marvel, we still don't know how the bangle brought her back to the past. But now here in Loki, we kind of have like an idea of how it works, and it made a little bit more sense to it. So the idea of season 2 being the second half of the book of Loki, I just love. So right now I'm still kind of just putting it on a level even playing field of season 1, which I love 1 and 2. So it wasn't one was better than the other for me.
I get that, and I feel like I like the way that, because I know the interview you're referring to with Tom Hiddleston, and I think that was a really good way to describe it. It's very much like book 1 and book 2. Mm-hmm. Because basically where we see Loki in season 1 is essentially where we left him off. At the end of season 1, we find him right at the start of season 2. It very much just continues. Mm-hmm. And I think that like the quality of both seasons is just like top tier. Top tier writing, everything. Like you can tell the writers are Loki fans. Right. Like you could like I think you can tell when the people who are writing these stories or writing for these characters, like you can tell when they're fans, because like they hit it on the nose of what we want to see. And I think, like you said, like season 1 held something so special. And I think for me, it's that we got to see this very intimate breakdown about the layers of Loki that we've seen through like the prior, like say decade of films with him. And we've seen him kind of process somewhat through like Ragnarok, but then in just a way that he could never have done if he hadn't gone to the TVA, because literally they needed to find out what makes a Loki, right? Like that was the big premise of season 1, because they really wanted to use Loki to find Sylvie, who is, wreaking havoc for the TVA. And something that I love is because like I said, I think the big difference between season 1 and season 2 is that season 2, we're looking at things from like a very big picture perspective of TVA, Loom, how we fix. And then you have a lot of characters playing different roles in that. And it feels very much like an ensemble piece versus a Loki show. But the way that I think that they bring it back in the final 2 episodes, like I think they even do bring up like what makes Loki a Loki. I think Sylvie and Loki have that conversation, which I think starts to bring it back into it being very much a Loki story, which it is, right? And I feel like that was so perfect. Like I love that. I love the way that they orchestrated it. And I think that, I don't want to get into the ending just yet, because I feel like there's so much to talk to you about before we get into that. But I feel like the way that book 1 and book 2 go, and then the ending, I think it's just such a beautiful story for Loki, a sad story, a sad story. But I think really satisfying as a fan to find him or leave him in that place, knowing where he is mentally, I think is just top tier writing.
I would say just with the season, I think we needed this season to be what we got, which is more of Loki. Just because, say, the first season, I think we were in shock and awe about how good Sylvie was. And I feel like we did get a feel of Loki and Sylvie, but I think it was just getting that other variant of Loki. It was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to call this a Sylvie show. But the first season, we got a little bit more of that, to where in this season, I think this was like a journey specifically for Loki. We didn't get as much Sylvie this go around. Even though she has the little device she stole from He Who Remains, I like the fact that it got to the point to where even with that, it was still Loki's show throughout the whole season about what's going on, how he's slipping, and by the end of it, it just came down to the point to where He Who Remains said he wrote it all, and that comes to show how let's say diabolical He Who Remains is, because we kind of got that general idea in the first season of, oh, he's just a goofy character, he's just a variant of Kang. We knew he's Kang back then, but now it's just like things got serious. He's like, all right, I'm done playing. It's like you did see like the less kind of comical version of He Who Remains, because now he's just like, all right, I see Loki's kind of caught up to where I want him to be, and now we're going to have a real conversation. And for me, that made the Loki story even more great, but also it now pushed the curiosity of, he did mention that his variants are already out there, the Kang variants are already out there. So I think that acknowledges what we saw at the end of Quantumania, because that little, let's say, void at the end of Quantumania, I'm just going to say that is a safe space, almost kind of like the quantum realm, just for like the other Kangs to just meet up and things like that. Yeah, like I feel like even if there was still a universe and not a multiverse, I feel like that would still be there. What do you think? Like,
yes, because I think they're considered to be like pocket dimensions. The way we see the city of the gods and say like Thor, Love and Thunder,
right,
like that, right? So I think they're meant to be like pocket dimensions. I think it adds another element that there's like multiversal because there's so many Kings there. But I would consider it a pocket dimension. I think we don't know so more beyond that, but I can definitely like comfortably put it under that category.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would assume it's just like it's a pocket dimension within someone's multiverse, within someone's timeline, that they all just seem to converge on, right?
Sure,
but yeah, I would definitely say that that's kind of the case. And I was going to say, like, just to revisit a couple of things that you said, particularly talking about He Who Remains at the end of season 1 of Loki, because you and I were like, okay, obviously his persona is that of like, he's very like goofy, playful, very playful. Yeah. Very kind of like, you can kill me, this happened. You don't kill me, this happens. Like, you know, but there's something so unauthentic about like his, like the way he was like saying things. It felt like a game. It was a game, right? And I feel like you and I were both kind of like, something ain't right. Something right. Like I think we were even trying to dissect like almost like a lot of his monologue of like, but what does he really mean? You know? And I think it was so satisfying. I think when, you know, obviously we're replaying the scene over and over when Loki's trying to stop Sylvie from killing He Who Remains, and then it just like abruptly stops. And he's just like, how many times have we done this? And then it's like the facade kind of shifts for a moment. It goes away.
Sorry to cut you off. Do you happen to follow New Rockstars?
Yes.
Did you see their Kang breakdown?
If it's recent, no.
Well, it came out like say towards the end, like when the
I don't think I caught that one.
One thing that I didn't catch watching the episode of the time slipping originally, but that brought up, was the fact that in the elevator, right? Season 1, we see the elevator scene of He Who Remains eating apple, and then Sylvie swings a knife and he just moves out of the way because he knew that was going to happen. Now, season 2, elevator scene happens to where before she even swings, He Who Remains already moves out the way of Loki, as if he already knew. Though Loki kind of changed it from the time slipping, he already knew that was happening already. So regardless of what happened, whether if Sylvie swung her knife or her blade or whatnot, it was a slight difference, but He Who Remains already knew what was happening. So I thought that to be interesting, just to see like, no matter what outcome, he's already prepared for it regardless. Yeah. I think it's very comparable to, and I did see that. I did see that clip. It took me a minute to kind of remember it, but I think it's very similar to say Loki, centuries and centuries of replaying the same thing, trying to fix like the loom problem, right? You know, and then we see him in like I said, what would be like the most recent cut, and he's like, okay, make sure you do this and don't drop that because that will happen. Don't do that. You're so brave. And he's like listing all the things because he's done this so many times over centuries. Yeah. And now I feel like that you can even use as a glimpse, like a screenshot of how many times I'm sure Victor Timely
has done that in who knows how many different scenarios, and then multiply that by how many other He Who Remains or just Kangs there are. Like, I think it gives you a picture of like how they have their relationship with time.
Yeah.
And I think it gives a lot of context to some of the things that King the Conqueror said in Ant-Man and Quantumania, just in regards of like time is a prison, time is this, like time isn't what you perceive it to be, just like the way that they talk about time, because they speak about it less of like how we experience it, right, and more like malleable, because it is to them. So I think that scene was really cool, and I like the way that he highlighted that. Speaking specifically to like the new rock stars and how they pointed that out. Because I think it's like when he drops that facade, it's intimidating. It's intimidating because you get, I think, more of like although this isn't the Conqueror, but the Conqueror. I mean, he is the one who remained, right? He is the one who won, right? So that title can be applied, right? He's been called many things, right? And then I think it's amplified, or the moment that Loki's then like, and what makes you think that we've done this? Like,
when Loki paused it.
Oh, dude, because like the moment that Kang paused it, and is like, how many times have we done this? Or however it is that he started that conversation. Like I said, the dropping of the facade was intimidating.
Yeah.
And then you have Loki control the situation.
Yeah.
And pause. You realizing that he's done this before.
Right.
Like, I feel like it amplifies that Loki is also a badass. Like that moment, like I think I told you the first time when I was watching this, I had like a bag of Wingstop in my hand because the order had just like, I'm getting into the finale. I'm like, I got to order some Wingstop. They had a sale going on like the app. So they were like, 20 wings for like $10 and fries, whatever. I'm like, I'd be stupid not to do it. So I'm like, I'm going to get that. And it came with a free like chicken sandwich, right?
Oh, shoot.
So it was a whole thing. But the food comes as I was going to start watching the last episode. And so I press play and I'm about to do my setup, the one that one does when they order Wingstop to lay everything out. You get all the dipping sauces open, I didn't get to do any of that because I was like, just the moment that the episode just starts, I'm just like pulled in and I can't look away.
Right.
So I end up eating the Wingstop wings like if it's popcorn from a bag.
Oh my gosh.
And because the way that this episode just pulls you here and pulls you there and pulls you here, it's so fast paced, and I think it matches just like the time slipping and the speed of that. Like you're everywhere. And my emotions are everywhere. But I just remember like the sensations I had during that scene of like, oh my God. Like he paused thing. And then when Loki does it, I'm like, yes. Like you would think I'm watching a sporting event, like the way I'm watching this episode, because it's so dope. But all that to say that I think the intimidation or like the feelings we had about He Who Remains, the moment he kind of controls that situation, I think it just, like, you're kind of afraid. You're like, oh God, like, but then you realize that Loki has the one up on him and you're like, oh, man, it's just like the feeling is so like that episode just did. This is what I'm saying, that like the series overall is amazing.
Yeah.
Season 1, I think, just has something really special to it that I personally enjoy just because of the way that how much I love the character of Loki and what I love about that character. But the finale, like, I don't think I can find that same feeling in another project. In a way, I feel like it gave me a very condensed feeling of what Endgame did, in the sense of like I'm here and there with emotions.
Right.
And I don't compare very much to that feeling, right?
Sure.
So
let me ask you, is He Who Remains, first yes or no question, okay? Is He Who Remains the same variant of Victor Liebig or Victor Timely?
what do you mean? I mean, I see them as variants, right?
No, but like, are they variants or are they the same person?
I don't think they're the same person.
Okay.
You're speaking like singularly, same person. Yeah, I mean, I assume variant. I'm happy to be introduced to a theory where it's otherwise.
Okay.
Let's hear it.
theory.
I sensed it.
Just because, like, so many Instagrams like to point out the fact that, like, the story that He Who Remained kind of broke down and at the end of season 1, where he was going over the different variants and that little claymation, little storyboard that he showed to Loki and Sylvie, right? He was kind of breaking down. It's like in the 30th century, like a scientist discovered the multiverse and this, that, and the third, and introduced to the other variants, right? But like, and of course, I took that as he was talking about himself, right? So this season we get to meet Timely, and Timely is from early 1900s of Chicago, and from there that threw that theory out initially for me. You know, I was like, oh, he's not from the 30th century. This is just a guy from the olden times, right? Just happens to be a variant. But when it comes down to it, the way the season ended, this variant is stuck in the TVA, you know, and we have no idea what happens to him in terms of we don't get a clear idea if he ever goes back to his time or if somehow he stays in the TVA. They left that wide open for me, to the point to where eventually that theory can come into play, to where his initial thing holding him back was the technology of his time to make the book make sense. So what's to say that he didn't travel to the 30th century, to where technology is more advanced, where he can create and do more of what was told at the end of season 1. Mm-hmm. So that's my theory of how Timely could be He Who Remains.
And I mean, especially with just like how anything is possible, I can so see that happening. This is my take on that. So Victor Timely was basically set as like a tool for He Who Remains, right? It was his failsafe, right? Much like the loom, to just reset everything.
Right.
So the boy in the old-timey Chicago needed to be activated for him to be set on a path to then eventually become He Who Remains, because that was his overall goal, right? He needed to, it's like a loop, right? That he created himself. Like, I always end up here, right?
Yeah.
That's where like that's where like the handbook comes in. That's where Renslayer came in terms of having to deliver the handbook to him as a youth, right?
Right.
That set him on this path for them to then later pluck from a different, like later down the road as he's like matured and marinated in that, and then put him on the path to become He Who Remains, right? So that was his whole plan, right? Mm-hmm. However, Loki and Sylvie, I don't want to give Sylvie as much credit, but Loki specifically made sure that didn't happen, right? Mm-hmm. He very much severed that loop that He Who Remains so hubrisly was like, this is like infinite. This is inevitable, right?
Right.
And so I think when Loki severed him from that plan of like, oh, like it always gets reset to this, the loom, Victor Timely, me, all of that. I feel like it also severed Victor Timely from that path also. I think that the like journey he takes with the team, having met OB, and just getting to the point where he's like, I'm going to take the suit. He who remains is he who remains for a reason. He doesn't do that shit. He doesn't. This Victor Timely did.
We don't know that. How do we know that?
How do we know what?
That He Who Remains doesn't do that.
I feel like based on everything that we've seen, not everything, but I feel like especially with the dialogue we've had with He Remains, the breakdown of his own plan, like he always sees himself as the one that stays. Right. When you see Victor Timely in earlier pieces, he shares that same, I think, what's the word? I don't want to say thought process because it's deeper than that. That same ideology, you know, like he gets bothered when Renslayer is like, we, and this is our plan. Like he hates that kind of language to the point that he kicks her off the boat, right? And moves on with with Miss Minutes. Mm-hmm. So like, I think up to this point, like he very much mirrors like He Who Remains in terms of his values, which is how he, you know, you can see with the influence that Miss Minutes and Renslayer have, like, mold him into He Who Remains, right? Sure. However, like, he ended up being completely detached from that path and went on with Loki and the rest of them. And he got to meet OB. And when he meets OB, it's a completely different situation. Like, he's so open to collaboration. He's so open to sharing the spotlight. Mm-hmm. He's so open to seeing him in, like, an even playing field. Like, he almost idolizes him and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that whole experience, and then leading to the point of someone needing to take the suit and going out, like, they know the very, very, very minute chance that they have of succeeding. Mm-hmm. We know now, having seen that this had to be replayed over centuries just for them to try to get it kind of right. Like, He Who Remains would not have taken that risk. It's just not part of it. It's his description. It's just not. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that is a really good sticking point of, like, definitively, like, Victor Timely is no longer, he's like, I'm not associated with that guy. Like, in terms of, like, those very big bullet point ideologies and just, like, describing factors that make He Who Remains. So I feel like by the end of the series, like, you know, Victor Timely, the one that's left in the TVA, I don't think he has the same motives as He Who Remains in that way. He has the ability to now go to a timeline where he can, you know, use his knowledge to then maybe, you know, set that course, and he can, right? But I don't think he has that motive anymore. I just don't. And also on top of that, like, he experienced or witnessed someone like Loki, who historically was just this mischievous, selfish individual, do one of the most selfless things ever done. And I just feel like the exposure to all of that experience, and just really, like, stamped by the fact that he offered to go and we saw him die so many times. I just feel like he's on a different path. Like, in my eyes, like, I think he's probably going to stay at the TVA. I don't know why he would go back to his own timeline. Like, if people were after him, first of all, right? I don't see why he would go to his own timeline. I wouldn't say that he's completely selfless and all these things. You know, I feel like that's, like, a couple steps away. But I feel like he would stay at the TVA. I don't know. Like, I feel like he would stay at the TVA. Like, there he has Obi. Why would he ever leave Obi? Like, I feel like it would just be like I feel like he would want to stay there. And I feel like he would actually end up becoming such an integral part of what the TVA becomes and what it morphs into. Because I think by the end of this series, like, we see the TVA, like, I mean, before it was to, you know, trim off, like, timelines and branches and stuff. And then in season 2, we kind of see that they don't really know what their role is just yet. And I think now, with the way that we see them at the end of the season, like, they're monitoring, you know, different King variants now that there's this, like, you know, like, just tree of life of timelines and multiverses. And so, although their role hasn't been explicitly stated, I feel like part of it is, like, they feel like they have a Kang division where they're, like, just monitoring those threats of Kang because they know historically it's going to happen. And so, yeah, that's my kind of piece when it comes to Victor Timely, at least.
Okay. So I have two things. Just when it comes down to the comparison of He Who Remains and Timely for me, just that series, that theory aside, say when it comes down to the relationship with Renslayer, right? Initially, we hear the reporting at the beginning of this season of her being pivotal to this movement that He Who Remains putting together, right? But after he has this conversation with her, we get a visual of this conversation, and then out of nowhere, he calls Miss Minutes to do what they did in Star Wars, just to kill off everybody. Basically, not kill off, but kill off the memory of everything. So from there, I got, okay, this version, or He Who Remains, is more so a solo type of individual. even though he's like, oh, I want you by my side or this, that, or whatever, he still had the intentions of erasing her memory. And that almost is, for me, borderline a parallel to where she kind of just talking to Timely. It's like, oh, it's like you and me, we're a time, like we're a team. And then he, in his mind, he's like, hold up. All right, like I don't do teams, you know what I'm saying? And shipped her off in the boat. So like those characteristics almost kind of stuck with me in terms of him being the solo route. And for one, we still barely even know Timely. We just know that we kind of used him for his face to get to the loom or what.
Yeah.
All right, and then the second part, as far as let's say Timely versus He Who Remains, right? When it comes down to just those two variants, why we already know why we don't get He Who Remains in the Council of Kangs, just because at the end of the day, he was killed off
He doesn't fuck
at
with
that
them.
time. Right. He conquered all of them. But why don't we get a Victor Timely variant in, like, or at least a visual in this Council of Kangs if he is actual, like, because he is a variant, you know, he would be a part of that. So I would assume that he would be separate because he and He Who Remains would be the same person.
In terms of why he wasn't included in the Council of Kings, right? Well, I mean, we don't know that if he was included because there's so many, like he could very well be there. However, I kind of don't think he is. So like he could be there because it's kind of hard to tell just because of how many there are. But I don't think that Pocket Dimension with all of the Kangs, I don't think it has all of the Kangs. You know what I mean? Like at that given moment.
Didn't they say he brought all of them? Didn't the bluish Kang say?
What did he say?
I think he's like, I called all of them. He's like, how many?
I called all of you.
And he was like, I called all of them.
Oh, for someone who's only watched Ant-Man like a couple times, that's something that didn't stick with me. So I don't know. I don't know at that point. I feel like I have to watch it and kind of get a better feel for how I stand on it.
Right.
But I don't think that I could see a plethora of reasons why he wouldn't go to it. Like, because also, okay, I feel like the Kangs that he reaches out to are the Kangs that are aware of this, like, conflict that they have within each other. Because I feel like if you, for example, like, rang up the phone and, like, Victor Timely, like, you know, in preps for his next little scheme, answers, and he, like, you know, you tell him all, like, that's going on, like, he'll probably dip because he'd be like, yeah, like, I see opportunity. We're here. It's limited. But like, if you call Victor Timely now at the TVA, I don't think he'd show up. I think he might stay at the TVA. Like, I see him because I feel like his why is a little different. Like his like than what we saw him say before. Like, and I think the comparison you made with, like, you know, just how he views teamwork or just collaboration, how it, like, so plainly aligns with how, like, He Who Remains is. And then we see that shift after he joins up with, like, Loki and Sylvie and specifically OB. Like, I feel like you see how his, like, mindset just changes completely. So I think it depends on when is the call being given. And obviously it wasn't before he met Loki. So in terms of, like, you know what I mean? Because, hold on, just to give more context with it, because at the end of season 2, they mention what are the events of Ant-Man and Quantumania, because they're like, you know, they're monitoring different Lokis. I'm sorry, Kangs. Right. And they're like, oh, like any activity or whatever. It's like, oh, there was some activity on that, but it was resolved. Right. They're specifically talking about Ant-Man Quantumania. So it is TBD because we don't know if Kang is in the room or with the TV at this moment. The call to the Kangs would have been made around that, like that space. So I guess the question would be is, like, now that we know where He Who Remains is, right? The experiences he had with his team, like, is he in the TVA right now? Is he on a different timeline? If he gets the call now, like, would he be there, right?
That would be, I guess, the question for time, because now that you kind of put the events in that order, if they're referencing what happened to, because I remember that they said a 616, and I was like, there it is, 616. They're talking about Ant-Man or whatnot. But they were talking about that, and then post credit scene where we get the Castle of Kang. So of course, that happens after that variant was taken care of. So do we know Blue Kang's like official title? I know he has a title. I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Just the Conqueror. Like, they call him the Conqueror the whole time.
Oh,
is that what you're asking?
I'm talking about the one that was just kind of like leading. Like, he had the Egyptian one in the background, and then he had like the cyborg one like behind him too. So he's kind of like the head Kang, basically. But either way, if he made the call, then yes, it would be post season 2 of Loki. Mm-hmm. But we can't say when. I just know after Loki takes the throne, they go into everybody's path as far as
where they are now.
Obi's back in the shop. Sylvie's figuring it out somewhere. What's Owen Wilson's name again?
Mobius.
Mobius is checking out his life just to see what it could be and just letting time pass, because before, I guess, the TVA, time doesn't pass. So at the end of the day, they showed everyone but Timely post Loki taking the throne.
What you do see is you see a young Victor Timely not receive the book.
Sure.
So I think what this specific part is alluding to is that on a timeline, like that, now that he wasn't activated, right? He's just on his own path. That's not necessarily connected to the overall plan of a He Who Remains. That answers that piece, but it doesn't answer, right? Like, our Victor Timely, who is obviously grown and was with the team by the time of, like, so yeah, we don't get like a specific like.
Yeah, like I wouldn't say that's the answer, because I can say that scene is in another branch. You know,
well, it's definitely not our Victor Timely anymore. Our Victor Timely is like is grown. He doesn't just disappear. He doesn't just disappear. So yeah, absolutely facts. I think it just more so resolves, like, I guess, his beginnings that were altered by a He Who Remains. Like, that wasn't necessarily supposed to be his route, right? It was affected. So I think it just gives resolution of like, and that kid was left alone, you know?
He's there making candles.
Yeah. And so, like, I think that was that resolution, but they did not give us like show us where he ended up. And I think that's very, very intentional, because if they showed him on a different timeline, then it gives us answers to kind of steer one way.
Right.
If we show him with the TVA, again, like, I think it gives us too much information right now. Like, I kind of like that we don't know. And I like that they didn't show us, because that means that they're intentionally holding it for something. I think I'm giving the MCU too much credit, because as of right now, they're not doing things great, but I'm assuming they're using their old school mind of thinking. Right. So I don't know. Like, I feel like it's, I feel like it's because he's going to be a part, like, I think if any king, he's going to be a king that's on our side.
Yeah.
Like, I really think that's what's going to be the case. Like, I genuinely feel like he stayed at the TVA, and when he got the call, like, post whatever events, right? I think he would be like, F you, I'm telling my friends, and then running off and be like, maybe this is where the alarms go off. The TVA is like, oh my God, there's an assembly of kings. Like, red alert, red alert, red alert. And then this is where, like, things start to actively get prepped for what we know will be, like, the war, you know?
Yeah.
So, like, that's my theory in terms of just seeing how his character developed during this series, this season.
Yeah.
But I can also see, because he is, at the end of the day, a king. We know he's a con man. We know all these things. I do believe
that was a major point in this season.
It was.
regardless of what he did in the TVA, in his time, he was conning people.
100%.
No matter what.
100%. So he could very well have gone to a different timeline, trying to now use his knowledge and then some from having talked to OB to, you know, con again. And now he's got the phone call coming in from all the Kangs and he's like, oh, dope. I kind of been waiting for something like this. And now he's on that side.
Let me just erase everybody's memory real quick.
Yeah.
And I'll be there in a second.
Yeah.
Like, I'm conquering everything. Now it's the universe.
So I feel, and that's very plausible because that is so Kang, right? That's a Kang thing to do. Kind of like how Mobius was like talking to Loki in season 1. Loki's like, I would never do that. He's like, Loki, you do it all the time. It's a Loki thing to do. He's like, I'll never do it again. Like, it's like, that's very like on point and on brand for a Kang, which is why it's like, yeah, like that's an easy answer. Like that most likely will be the case.
Sure.
I really feel like he's a very different Kang by the end of this season. And so I feel like I'd really love to see him be alongside of like our guys. Like I do. This particular Kang. This particular Kang.
So let's say Timely right now, you can flip a coin to where he can be good or he can be he who remains. Just because the last little thing I want to just say on that is like I've always been curious as to why he who remained named this Loki his favorite. As if like he's known this Loki for a long time, you know? That's the only thing that's kind of just stuck in my mind, like, oh, you've been my favorite since, you know, came to get me out of Chicago back in the day. Now we're here. But all in all, this is just a theory. This is just chills, hopes, and dreams. You know what I'm saying?
Honestly, this was a really fun rabbit hole.
Yeah.
That was a really fun rabbit hole because I think, you know, it's intentional that we didn't get his, like, oh, where is he now story.
Right.
Because they give us, I think, a resolution of like, oh, it's nice to know that kid was just left alone. But I think it was put in place to make us feel like we got his answer, but we didn't.
You didn't.
And so I think that's intentional. And whether it's because he's going to actually be integral to the sounding of the alarm of like, they are here now, right? Because if you see this film, and actually, I think this is a thing I'm happy to mention before we start to wrap up, is like this film, Ant-Man Quantumania, all of these films are kind of having like a similar tone that I really appreciate because it's giving some uniformity and connection, which is very much lacking in this saga.
Yeah.
Is like, he's coming. They're coming. Like there's this threat, like this awareness that there's a threat coming, kind of like how in the original saga, like there's this looming of like someone's messing with the Infinity Stones, like that to me is exciting because they're all recognizing a threat. So come to when it's like the sounding of the alarm, Hulk is crashing through like the windows of like Doctor Strange, like sanctum.
Yeah.
It's like he's here. Everyone understands what that means.
Yeah.
Like, to an extent, they know, like it's like that fear that Tony feels when he is like, this is the one behind Loki. He was behind New York. The threat that you have been having like anxiety over for years is finally here. Like, I like that we are kind of getting those little sprinkles around. And it's, to me, that's exciting. Like that to me is like a very like, okay, like it's prepping. Obviously.
Yeah.
The legal matters kind of change a little bit, but we won't talk about that just yet, I think. I think we'll just keep it TBD.
I think the last question that I just want to just end today with is this Loki tree the reason for the incursions of the multiverse of madness?
No, I definitely wouldn't say he's the reason for the incursions. Like, I think if anything, he's something that's trying to prevent them because he's trying to facilitate a happy flow of these multiverses so that they can coexist, right? Okay. I think the incursion is an opposing and very opposite thing than that. Like, I feel like what Loki's purpose is to avoid those things. And so I don't think that he's what's causing those incursions. Like, I'm not really sure what the relationship with that is. Like,
we still need a clear definition just because just from everything that we've gotten, they've said like the incursion is when two universes collide, but
I think that's more. I think the incursions are caused more so by activity within the timelines.
Okay.
So I think that like Loki's our Lord and Savior is facilitating the flow of all these multiverses. I think the incursions, although we do need more of an explanation of what they really are or how they occur, I think we need more detail in that. But I think that they're more so caused by like actions within individuals of the timelines. Like I don't think it's like it's on a micro level versus macro of like Loki's involvement, I think.
Okay. Well, we'll see. But I think that's it. Do you have anything else?
Oh, this was great Kang talk. I feel like this wasn't very much of a Loki talk. I mean, obviously we talked about Loki, but this was a really fun Kang talk. Yeah.
Sure. I wanted to kind of discuss Kang just because I feel like when we were streaming before, we kind of touched it because he was just being introduced, but now we've seen different versions. Now there are different theories, and I just had a few questions that I wanted to kind of go over today. But I feel like Loki was a good kind of intro into these questions, being that this is the most clear-cut multiversal thing that I feel like we've gotten out of but I want to say season 4.
Saga, just a saga, I think.
Just this multiversal saga. Phase 4 and Phase 5, basically. Everything else has just kind of been like question marks, but Loki season 1 and 2 is multiverse related strictly, you know? And now we're getting more of an idea of who Kang is, who he could be.
Yeah.
And
like I think it's the backbone of the theories that will arise when it comes to this saga, because it's concrete, right? It's very it's the handbook for us to kind of go off of right now.
Kang Dynasty is before Secret Wars, right?
Kang Dynasty is before Secret Wars, I believe, because Secret Wars I think would be the big battle. I think, yeah. As of now.
Okay. All right. Well, this has been an episode, or the next episode of the Comic Cinematic Universe Comics and Coffee edition, and we'll be back. We're actually going to be back in the new year. Yeah. So stay tuned. By the time you hear this, it'll still be 2023, because I'm actually looking into getting this on all streaming platforms this week, or even while I'm gone. So this will be up and going. And this was fun.
This is awesome. Super excited, guys. We'll see you guys in the new year.
All right.
It's gonna be good.
Yeah.
It's gonna be lit for the Comic Cinematic Universe.
100%.
Hell yeah.
We're back. All right, guys. Take it easy. Have a good one.